Hi there. Welcome back to Kari's Confessions, a nonprofit exec tells all. I'm Kari Anderson, principal with Incite Consulting. I've spent 25 years in the nonprofit sector in various leadership roles with 7 nonprofit organizations. I now provide coaching and consulting services to ensure that nonprofits like yours have the structure, systems, and practices to do your best work. It seems wherever I go, I continue to hear that nonprofit execs need a space to gather, to receive tools, feedback, and advice that encourages you to stay the course at your organization or in the sector. It doesn't seem to matter if you're in a village of 182 or a metropolis of millions, nonprofit work still is both gratifying and lonely. I'm here to make sure that you have a chance to breathe, maybe laugh a little, smirk, and get re energized again about the important work that you do. So today's podcast topic is transparency, why it matters for your organization, and best practice tips for success. So, whether you're brand new to the nonprofit sector or a veteran, I'm sure that you know that building trust for your business is essential. It's imperative that you build authentic and trustworthy connections with donors, cross sector partners, clients, the people you're serving, employees, funders. You get the idea. Your reputation as to how you receive and acknowledge donations, serve people, and follow through towards achieving your mission all have an impact on your sustainability. As we get into today's topic, I want you to think about these 3 takeaways from today's podcast. Number 1, your accomplishments are the number 1 factor in establishing donor trust. Number 2, the GuideStar seal of approval, if you will, it's the real deal. We'll talk more about that. And number 3, easy access to critical information is key for your organization. So, according to Candid, a new give.org report shows that a nonprofit's accomplishments are the number 1 factor in establishing donor trust. According to the give.org report, the top reasons are inspiring trust are the charity's accomplishments, reputation, and financials, right? So, accomplishments, reputation, and financials. I want you to think right now where you think you sit in terms of trust with your donor. On the flip side, donors cited greed and high compensation, negative reputation, and the lack of honesty and transparency as the most common reasons to distrust a charity. Now, I'm going to sidebar for a second. I am all about ensuring that people are paid fairly for their work. And as your organization's budget increases, you are going to be paid more. Part of how we can address the transparency issue is helping people understand that, again, you are running a business and there are competencies to be able to run the business effectively. I am never going to apologize for paying people fairly. But part of this is the bridge in terms of donors understanding that we're a business, right? We have a tax status as a nonprofit, and we need to make sure that we're paying people appropriately. So, when we think about more information from Candid, there's a couple more pieces that I just want to share with you that hopefully will resonate. Villanova University and the University of Wisconsin and recently did some research, and the Milwaukee researchers compared nonprofits that earned that GuideStar seal of transparency to those that didn't. The nonprofits that earned a seal averaged 53% more in contributions the following year than the organizations with no seal. 53%. I want you to think about where that would land with your budget right now. The research also found organizations that elect to be more transparent had stronger performance across a range of governance, financial, and operational dimensions. So, quick test for you right now. Do you actually have a GuideStar seal of transparency? Do you know whether it's platinum? Do you know whether it's gold? Do you know whether it's silver? Do you actually even know how to go about applying for one? This is good stuff to be able to do. And all of it is Googleable. So I can Google you right now and figure out whether or not you've got that seal of transparency. So the stats that I just shared speak to the importance of building trust and being transparent in your organization. So what exactly do I mean, or do we mean about being transparent as a not-for-profit organization? A transparent organization is open, honest, clearly communicates what's going on behind the scenes work like finances, operating best practices, who your leadership is, and that's both board and staff, policies, etc. There are steps, certainly, that we can take to become more transparent. I'm going to share some of those with you right now. First and foremost, right? Your website is your storefront. Your website's open 24/7, which means you should have some great hosting that's going on to ensure your website doesn't go down. Make key information readily available on your website. The idea is that anyone, right, a donor, a funder, a client, a partner, should not have to hunt and hunt with multiple clicks to find information that should be readily available. A huge pet peeve of mine is going on to a non-for-profit website and not being able to get contact information for key staff. Stop already with the contact form. Stop, right? If I can't find a phone number that's going to reach you or an email address, I'm moving on. And the same thing goes for board members. We should have a list of board members, not necessarily their contact information, names, photos, bios, right? This shows legitimacy to the public in terms of who is providing the check and balance for your organization. But if you are staff, do not make me hunt for that information. And please make sure that if someone's actually trying to reach you, that you're being responsive, whether that is a text, whether that is an email, or whether that is a phone call. So potential donors, volunteers, etc., need to be able to easily identify whom to connect with specific question, and they need to be able to email or call them right then. They shouldn't be having to wait weeks for something to come back from a contact form or a ghosting, which is unfortunately more often than not what's happening right now. I mentioned the need for you to be able to list those board members again as a credibility source. And folks, if your board list is outdated on the website, we probably should address that ASAP, right? Again, not helpful in terms of communication practices with your public. Make sure that there's a link to your 990 on the website. Remember, I can Google that, right? Anyone can Google your 990 with IRS. And so why wouldn't you just put that on your site? Again, to make things easily accessible, that 990 is just as good as the GuideStar in terms of sharing with folks what your financials are, who your board members are, and it also allows that great opportunity to market for free to other constituents that may not be readily familiar with your work. If you've not created an annual report or you haven't created an annual or an impact report in some time, consider making that an annual best practice for your organization. What is an annual report? It can be long, it can be short. Certainly, it can be digital, it can be print. But the idea is that you're sharing key impact data, you're sharing financial overview of revenues and expenses, how your mission is being impacted, and how people can support you, right? So people want to be able to see your year in review and how you're progressing against mission. Another idea in terms of how you can improve transparency for your organization, register through GuideStar, which Candid has now purchased, and get a seal of transparency. As the stats I mentioned earlier, it's a key signal to donors in particular that you take transparency seriously and that you're meeting the necessary standards for nonprofits in this day and age in the United States. I would encourage you also to have open dialogue at both board and staff meetings. If you work to create an internal culture of transparency, it's imperative in order for you to be outwardly transparent, right? So we work on this internally so that we can readily share with constituents critical information about your organization. I run into too many nonprofits that sugarcoat or avoid entirely tough conversations. That's actually another critical component of being transparent. The ability to navigate challenging conversations, it's hard, but it if you do it, it builds trust and strengthens relationships with both board and staff. So we can't avoid those. And again, that allows for you to be transparent to the public. I would offer that it's important to consider an independent audit, even if you're not legally required to. Every state has a threshold of income that nonprofits have to hit before that triggers in terms of legal obligation. But it's certainly best practice to have a financial review every year. And especially when there happens to be a large transition at an organization, it could be significant board members that have termed, it could be the transition of a longtime executive director. That is a natural trigger point for an audit. An independent audit, and again, and this is done not by your bookkeeper, it's probably not done by your contracted accountant, it's another entity. It's a great way to ensure that you've got the right systems in place so that you can continue to grow, and that you've got strong and fiscally responsible policies in place. Having someone that is not tied to the organization ensures there's no bias when that audit is completed. I would say communicate, communicate, and communicate. I'll dig deeper into this into a future podcast, but reports indicate that donors state that receiving reports of impact is a way that they determine if the organization is trustworthy, right? So the idea of if we're communicating consistently, sneak peek, right? Minimally 3 times a year, ideally at least 7 times a year to your constituents, the more you can communicate, the threshold of trust raises with those donors. The idea is we want to make sure that we're communicating on a consistent basis without asking. And if we're communicating consistently to demonstrate and convey impact, and making sure they're receiving more of those touch points than asks during the course of the year. I would also share that having accurate and readable financial reports available and making sure that key staff and board leadership understand them, right? It's one thing to use QuickBooks, it's another thing to generate a profit and loss statement or a balance sheet from QuickBooks, but if no one understands what they're looking at, it doesn't further, the conversation in terms of how we're being transparent with our data. We've got to be able, as staff and as leadership volunteers, to prepare and discuss finances with our funders in order to be able to truly demonstrate what the current need is, challenges, and long term financial goals and sustainability strategies. There's certainly data that supports that if we don't understand our finances, then it's harder to fundraise. And while we as paid staff have to be able to understand our finances, oftentimes this is a piece that's glossed over with the board, and we miss a critical moment at that juncture, right? To be able to help them bridge the gap in understanding so that they can be successful fundraisers for us as well. If you haven't yet established internal controls, I would encourage you to do so. Also, this elevates transparency. Internal controls is just a fancy phrase for, do we have checks and balances in terms of how we handle our money? And if you're interested in a couple of sample policies, you're welcome to contact me directly. Additional policies that help with transparency are a gift acceptance policy, conflict of interest policy, code of conduct, confidentiality, whistleblower, and document retention and destruction. Those are pretty critical board policies. I would encourage you to follow state and federal guidelines, including the filing of your IRS Form 990 and making sure that the board reviews it prior to submission, right? While that is not the law, it's certainly a best practice and it allows people the opportunity to learn more about your finances. But since all of your board names are on that document, I'd want to make sure it was accurate before it gets sent to the IRS. And remember, executive directors, you can't sign the 990. It has to be one of your elected board officers. So transparency is a must, right? Start today with the things you can quickly do. Getting in critical information onto your website would probably be the easiest. Make a plan to tackle the rest throughout the rest of this coming year. As we wrap up today's episode, again, the 3 takeaways, in my opinion, that probably might resonate most. Your accomplishments are the number one factor in establishing donor trust. And in order for the donor to know, we need to communicate with them. The GuideStar seal is the real deal. Go get one. And easy access to critical information is key. Make sure to follow me on your favorite streaming platforms, including YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. For additional resources, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also check out my website at inciteconsultinggroup.com. Have a great day. Thanks for joining. Take care.